again, my name is Honna Veerkamp, and welcome to this fifth session of the podcasting seminar we've been doing this fall. So today we're focusing on hosting and distribution and promotion. Before we move on, I want to just do a quick recap of the topics that we have covered earlier in this seminar, and these are all available on our YouTube channel, so I would encourage you to go back and watch these sessions on the YouTube channel if you would like to. But just to kind of go through the basics of what goes into making a podcast and where we're at today. In our first session, we covered ideas, development of concept and ideas, thinking about who your audience might be. After you think about those things, then you want to start doing recordings and editing them. We did a session on that. We also talked about mixing and sort of some more advanced techniques for mixing your podcast. After you have your file for your first episode or two, you will send those out as an MP3. An MP3 is a compressed file that takes up less room on the web, and so it goes out as an MP3 file. It includes metadata, which says like the title and the name of your podcast and things like that. And so that actually gets sent out via an RSS feed. We're going to get into more of the last 3 bullet points today, but that gets sent out to where people basically listen to it and download it. So we're going to get into all the ins and outs of that, how that happens today, and also talk about how to promote and kind of build an audience around that. So let's move on. So the first thing we want to talk about is hosting sites. And so typically hosting and distribution is different, although sometimes these things happen together. There are some that do both of these things. This is basically where your actual file is stored online so that it can be accessed by the people that listen to it. And the nice thing about this is that after you set up the infrastructure that we're going to talk about, you only have to actually upload new content to one place, and then you set up the infrastructure so it gets pushed out to the places where people hear it, whether it's on Apple or Google or Spotify or any of the other ones. So this happens with an RSS feed. And so an RSS stands for really simple syndication. And basically this is code that points people to your content that is on this hosting site, and so that it can be accessed from multiple different places, and it doesn't have to be stored on servers all over on different places. It can just be stored in one spot. Most of these hosting sites that we'll talk about will create this RSS feed for you, and I would recommend finding one that does, because it makes it really easy. It is something that if you're really tech savvy and experienced with coding, you can do yourself, but unless that's the case, I would recommend using a site that will provide it for you. Most of the sites do charge a small monthly fee because they are offering the bandwidth to host your files, and they are usually they're usually developing this RSS feed for you. But there are some free options available as well that we'll talk about. Some of them also include distribution on their own sites. Places like SoundCloud are also places where people go to get content. Some of them will push them out to the distribution sites for you, but typically these are distinct processes. And there are many, many different options available. So I'm going to talk more about the different criteria that you may want to consider when you're choosing, but this is something that's going to definitely require research for your specific situation. I want to point out some of the some leading options that I've included the icons for. So in the bottom left is one called Libsyn, which is probably the oldest podcast hosting site. It was one of the first ones, and their plans start at $5 a month for with some limitations. They do offer analytics and RSS feed. They also have a directory. So these are just the different kinds of things that you're considering. In the next slide, I'll go more into detail about the specific considerations that I would recommend. And these are just offered as examples too. They're not comprehensive by any means. In the top left, the logo is for a site called Podbean. They offer free accounts with limited storage and uploads, and then they charge about $9 a month for unlimited. In the bottom right is Internet Archive, which is a really great site for hosting anything for free. You can also share Creative Commons content. So I will mention that there's a question about, could I list some of the sites? I want to mention that we will share this PowerPoint slide with you after the presentation. Mary will email it out, and in the speaker notes, in the PowerPoint presentation, it will include the speaker notes that I'm saying, and so you will have the ones that I'm mentioning listed, and I have links in the notes to about 7 of them, but there are many, many more. So I'm going to talk about some of them and then also give you some things to think about in researching them, because there are many more that I'm not even going to touch on. These ones that I'm mentioning right now are just some of the examples. Internet Archive is a great place to share free content and content that has Creative Commons licenses. It's free to use, but you would have to have an RSS feed that you create yourself for that. So in the speaker notes, I'm also including an article about how to do that and the pros and cons of doing that if you wanted to. The purple icon in the top right is called anchor.fm, and that is a newer hosting site, and it kind of bills itself as a free one-stop stop for podcasting that includes production, promotion, and distribution, all for free. And it seems pretty great. It also is one of those things that might be too good to be true, and some people worry about its stability and long-term success because of that. There was a time pretty recently where the site went down for a couple of days, for example. They also offer to push your content out to the distributors for you, but if they do that, then you lose the analytics option to track your own downloads. That just goes to their site. And so I would recommend that if you use Anchor, that you don't opt into their automation and that you do that part yourself. And then there are some other ones that just to think about that you might look into: RSS.com, Buzzsprout, Spreaker. These are just some of them. There are so many if you just look up podcast hosting sites. Whatever you decide to do, there's going to be a lot of considerations, and it's just going to be research because each situation is unique. But I want to offer some things that some of the considerations and factors to weigh when you're choosing a podcast hosting site. One of them is the monthly quotas and limits on uploads. So some of them, like for instance, SoundCloud has a free option, but they only allow you to have 3 hours of free content, whether it's uploads or old information. Some of these will allow you to upload a certain amount of content for free each month. So you want to think about how often you're planning to have your podcast, how long it is, how much you want to be uploading, to think about what those are going to work for you. Some of them also separate or limit your archives. So for instance, with SoundCloud, that's 3 hours period. Some of the other ones limit how much new content you can put up each month, but they allow you to keep your old archives on there. I think that is important because if you're building an audience, you want people to be able to listen to as many of your shows as possible and be able to go back to those archives. So I would recommend finding a site where your archives are not limited. Some of them also put limitations on your downloads and how many people can listen to them. And so when you're just starting out, that might be fine. But if you're trying to scale and build a large audience, then it's a counter incentive to be charged more when you have more downloads. So you might want to think about that. Let me look at this question. I'd like very much to know when each participant does launch a podcast. Please, okay, we're talking about people in the class. Yes, I definitely encourage you guys to keep in touch. And if people let us know when you're launching a podcast, we will put the word out. So I would love to know that too. Back to this. So you want to also just compare the other different things that they offer. So we mentioned the RSS feed. A lot of them have different built-in analytics. Some of them include distribution. Some of them have different monetization options, but you may not have control over it. So it may be like they will run ads on your content, you know? So think about those type of things and just weigh the pros and the cons of them. Another thing to think about is whether there are any proprietary limitations. So for example, up until just recently, Spotify would not allow podcasts that were hosted on SoundCloud onto their platform because they're competitors. They just changed that, which I'm really happy about because the library uses SoundCloud and now we are able to be on Spotify. And I don't know of any other examples offhand to warn you about, but it's just something to consider when you're looking at the details of each of these. And then of course there's a monthly fee and whether it's unlimited or what you're getting for your monthly fee and what your budget is. So I'm going to keep moving. If there are any particular questions relating to this as we go, feel free to shoot them out. Otherwise there'll be time as we go. So podcast directories, also known as distribution sites. I'm going to kind of interchange those terms as we're talking about them. This is where people actually listen to your content. And so again, there are a lot of different options because, oops. Because of the fact that they're not actually storing your content, they are typically free to use. The exceptions are when sometimes some of those combination sites that are hosting and distributing might charge, but typically the directories do not charge. The icons that you see here represent 4 of the 5 top podcasting sites currently in 2020. So the top left one is Apple Podcasts, formerly iTunes, still is the leading podcast distributor and definitely important for anybody that uses iPhones and Apple products. Bottom left is Google Play, or now it's called Google Podcasts, and it has become the second leading one, definitely for people that don't use Apple. So those are the 2 most important ones. Spotify on the bottom right has become the 3rd top podcast distributor now. And then in the top right, we have Stitcher, and then not pictured is TuneIn, which is the 5th most popular site. So I would definitely recommend getting onto those sites to start, and then you can think about other ones in addition, but those are the main ones to start with. And so the way it works with these, you have to apply in the sense that you have to fill out a form to submit your work and you have to meet certain criteria that they have. But it's other than that, it's not, they're not selecting you from a bunch of people and just choosing based on aesthetics or taste. It's just a matter of jumping through the hoops. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time, and Apple has the strictest requirements and takes the longest. So I would recommend trying to get onto Apple first. It can take a couple weeks for that one. And then if you meet all of the requirements for Apple, you'll meet everybody else's requirements too. So I recommend that you start with them and then go through those. So that you usually have to go through this submission process this way. And then the nice thing is that once it is submitted, like I was saying, it takes a little bit of work to set up this infrastructure, but then it's all completely automated. So You won't have to be worrying about having to upload it to Apple and Google and Spotify and everything each month. You just upload it to your host and then it automatically goes there. If you make any changes to even this description or something, if you go and do that, that automatically gets pushed out too, because it's all happens through that RSS code. Sometimes it's not instant. It may there may be a little lag in when the changes get made or when it gets uploaded to different sites, but it usually happens the same day. So along with this, you're going to be submitting artwork that catches attention, and that's required for these hosting sites. And so this artwork also goes along with your RSS feed. So again, you only have to upload it to one place. If anything changes, it changes for everybody. But you want to get this set out because you're going to need that when you first set up your, when you first submit your podcast to these distribution sites. And different distributors have different requirements for these. Some of them don't have any particular requirements, but once again, Apple is the most strict about their requirements. And so if you meet Apple's requirements, you'll meet everybody else's requirements. And I have linked to an article that breaks down in detail the specifics for Apple in my speaker notes. But some of the important ones are that it needs to include your podcast title. You want to have clear fonts and imagery that relates to the podcast. This is what's going to get you seen on a little tiny phone in a scroll of thousands of little boxes. So you want it to stand out. You want it to be relevant. You want it to be unique, but not too complicated. I would say err on the side of just keeping it really simple. Since it needs to include your title, if you haven't titled your podcast, that's something to consider, that you want it to be something short enough that can fit into a little tiny logo. It needs to be square, and the specifications are a couple of the sites just say at least 1400 pixels on each side. Apple says between 1400 and 3000, so go with that and you'll be good for everybody. It needs to be on the RGB color space, which is the standard for computers, standard 72 DPI resolution, JPEG or PNG. And again, this is all listed out in the article that I will share with you all. There are some additional requirements that they mention that you're going to want to read. Things like having a prohibition on poor image quality, and they talk a little bit about what that is. Explicit language, reference to illegal drugs, profanity or violence. So just be aware of the requirements and make sure that you meet the requirements for Apple, and then you will be good for the other ones. So once you've done all that, once you have your podcast, you recorded some shows, you've edited it, you've picked out a host and registered, you've gotten everything lined up for the distributors. We want to talk about how to get attention, build community, build your audience. There are a lot of people recommend starting out with having at least a couple, if not, some people even say 3 to 5, 5 to 7 podcasts that you upload the very first time you put anything out there. This is so that people that, when they first hear about your show, if they're interested, can check out, can have a little bit more content to check out. Also, there's the opportunity to get noticed even more with things like Apple has a section called New and Noteworthy. You have to really have quite a bit of an audience to get into there, but it's worth trying for that because I've linked an article about that too, because it's, it's some kind of algorithm that's not entirely transparent about what goes into it, but definitely having your number of downloads and listeners are part of that. And so if you have more content for people to download, then you will have more downloads in this certain period of time. So you want to think about that. You also want to think about having as consistent of a release schedule as you can, so that and it would probably be better to space it out and have them less often and more consistent rather than having them come out more quickly at first and then have there be a lag, because you want to be able to build recognition and have people know when to expect what's coming. I want to talk about monetization a little bit, because this is a question that always comes up, and we're not going to be getting too much into how to make money on podcasts in this seminar, but basically all of the ways that you might make money on your podcast involve building an audience. And a lot of the points that we'll talk about in this section on community and growth, I've taken from Kristen Meinzer's book, So You Want to Start a Podcast, which I mentioned at the beginning of this seminar, and I have linked in the resources. We have it at the library, one of a lot of different podcasting books we have, but I really like it and I'd recommend it. But one of the key takeaways from that is that sponsors usually want to see at least 5,000 listeners before an audience of at least 5,000 before they'll start thinking about sponsorship. And so a couple of ways that people make money on podcasts, besides the monetization options built into hosting sites that you don't really have control over. One is sponsorship. So it's certain targeted ads that relate to your podcast that you include. And again, they want to see an audience before people are taking you seriously for that. Another way is some kind of crowdfunding. Usually people use Patreon, which is a crowdfunding platform for artists. Usually you ask people to pledge a certain amount of money, maybe a couple of dollars a month, and in exchange, the Patreon members get access to certain content that is not out there for regular people or something like that. And it's also a nice way to build a community, but it's one of those things that you got to get the ball rolling, and you usually need to have a community to start with before you can think about doing something like that. So my point is that the monetization part kind of essentially has to get put on the back burner until the audience is developed anyway, and that can lead to options for monetization. So you want to start thinking about what resources and networks that you already have. So, a lot of that is social media. You can talk about your podcast on your own social media accounts. You can think about setting up social media dedicated for the podcast. Word of mouth is really important. You want to ask all of your friends to share. You want to talk to your friends and family. You just want to get the word out as much as you can. For people that are doing podcasts that are topically related or related to a certain neighborhood, certain region, a certain topic, like working with networks that support that topic or that are neighborhood associations or things like that that are tied in and already have a built-in audience are a really good place to think about how to make connections with those. And then sometimes it can feel like you do all this work and put this out there and you don't even know if it just goes into the ether and if anybody's hearing it. So you want to think about ways that you can actually engage with your audience and build it. And so I would definitely recommend having some type of web presence. Some of these hosting sites offer a really minimal website. There are a lot of free sites available, do-it-yourself sites like Weebly or Wix or Squarespace or WordPress. I would encourage you to think about doing something like that. If you can afford it, a lot of them offer the option to pay a small fee for your own domain, so that rather than so it would just say your podcast name rather than .weebly.com or whatever, and it looks more professional. If you can afford it, it's a nice thing to do, but if not, it's not essential to getting going. And then also thinking about, like, if you have dedicated social media for your podcasts, you want to ask people to review your show, send emails, things like that, set up an email for your podcast. But you also want to think about, like, maybe there's a poll you could ask, or maybe you could ask question and answers or ask people about their experiences. So something that's a conversation starter that gives people something specific that they can engage with and invites people into a conversation, is a really great way to start thinking about that sort of thing. And then again, the word of mouth and just getting the word out there goes a long way with this. Another important thing is to think about cross promotion and interviews. And so, for example, we have a couple people who are in this class right now who are interested in doing podcasts on similar topics. And this would be a great opportunity to promote each other's work once you get the podcast going, to interview each other or talk about each other's work on your podcasts. If you can find people that have an audience that either are covering a similar topic or maybe not the same topic, but have an audience that would be similar, ideally someone that has an audience that is either similar to your size or that is a little bit larger than yours. If it's, a really big national show might be out of reach to start, but if you can talk to a local show that has a similar or slightly larger audience and ask them to interview you or offer to interview them and cross promote, rather than just ask them to interview you as a favor, you can offer content that is relevant to their audience. So you can look at the kind of things that they're talking about and say, hey, I want to talk about this topic. I think it would be relevant to your audience. Can you invite me on your show? And so things like that. And so, in this book that I mentioned by Krista Meinzer, she talks a lot about thinking about how to do those, how to pitch interviews and how to do good interviews, but also other local media. So, and those of you who already have that going for you, that's a great start of how to get things out there. I mentioned previously, but the library has a podcast. We would love to promote people that are learning about podcasting from the library to promote those shows. So once people get started, I hope you will reach out to us and we could do a short interview with you about your show for the library podcast. Maybe you want to interview us on your podcast, something like that. So there are a lot of great opportunities for this, and just, thinking about networking and really expanding what the possibilities of that might be. And then finally, this one comes from Meinzer too, but embracing your identity as a podcaster. And so this gets into, taking yourself seriously, ignoring the imposter syndrome that most of us face with this. You have come this far and are making a podcast or interested in making a podcast, and so you're a podcaster. So you can embrace that identity. And if you are able to embrace that identity, then it not only increases your confidence, but it'll make you more comfortable about putting the word out and talking about it. And then in turn will develop the show and build your audience and make you more confident in that identity. So those are the main ideas there. I'm curious if there are other ideas that people may have in this group about how to promote and build community. And if anybody feels comfortable speaking out loud while we're still recording, please do. Otherwise, if you want to chat anything, and I'll say that. Does anybody else have any other ideas that come to mind about how you might promote your podcast or build community around podcasts? This is definitely something that's an ongoing thing to be thinking about.
Well, I do a bunch of stuff for my blog. Besides, I have a good Twitter account, and I joined a lot of writing groups on there and media type people. And whenever I do a new blog, boom, every day I put something out there. Something else that I did is I created my own small calendars, and I make all my own stuff. I laminate them. The front is like, right now I have the 2021 calendar, and it has my blog, my address, web address. And then on the back are tips and stuff. So like, I've been trying to do some mailings in the St. Louis area. And then like, it used to be when I went out to a restaurant, when you sign the bill, I leave a calendar. I used to do pens, but calendars are a lot easier. Another thing I used to do, if I'm in the ladies' room, I set some out on the counters in there, you know. I mean, I try to think of different ways. Right now, since we're wearing masks, I have it advertised on my mask. And if somebody asks, oh, what is that? I'll say, oh, well, this is what it is. And of course, I carry them in my purse. Here's a calendar. So, I mean, a lot of it is that and word of mouth from my friends, my Facebook, my work. We have a Yammer page, and where it's like social media for work. And I'll post stuff out there. You know, I posted about my interview, you know, and stuff like that. That's what I've been doing.
And Patsy, we weren't recording yet when you mentioned your project. Do you want to say that for anyone that's listening on this YouTube later on?
Oh, my blog?
Yes.
It's www.onlinedatingwithpatsy.com, and it's the stories of online romance scammers. And it's hilarious, but I also pass along good information.
Great, thanks. So a lot of great tips, and you bring up a good point that any kind of tips that apply to general media promotion will apply to podcasts. It's not anything specific, and those kind of like cross-platform, like taking a something that's already established as a blog and turning it into a podcast is a great idea. Having a blog that supports a podcast, they really go hand in hand. So a lot of great things. If you guys have more ideas that you want to share, we have social media for a creative experience, which is on our website that we'll share in resources, but it's at SLPLCEXP for both for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And so if anybody has additional comments about that you want to add, we can keep that going. And here's some of the resources that I offer. The Creative Experience website has information about what we do and our resources. Although we're doing curbside right now, there are a lot of resources that you can still access. And then that'll also get you to the libraries page, which has a lot of downloadable info. There is information on lynda.com classes, which are free to you if you're a library, if you have a library card. A lot of other online training opportunities. There's a link to your library podcast, which Mary and I produce. And there's our YouTube channel, which is where the rest of these seminars will be. We have a lot of other virtual programs that some staff and some other outside presenters have been doing for creative experience that I would encourage you to check out. I will be doing a new series in the spring, starting in January, where I'm going to look at a different free online media production resource, either audio or video, or maybe some other ones each month. So the first one's in January. I can't remember the day offhand, but it's on our calendar on our website. And that one's going to be looking at Adobe Spark, and then there's going to be a different one each month. So check those out. And then the book that I mentioned is there too. Again, this is the last of 5, so it's been really fun to do these sessions with you all. And if you missed some of them, they are available on our website or on our YouTube site that I just mentioned. Our contact info is on this slide. Once again, Mary will send this presentation out to anybody that registered for this program, and it'll have all the speaker notes. If you're watching this later on YouTube and you'd like to get a copy of this presentation, just email us at that contact info and we'll get it to you. We've got time for questions. I'm going to leave the recording on first, and if there are questions that people would like to ask either in chat or out loud that you're comfortable having recorded, let's do that. And if not, we can turn it off and chat a little bit more. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions or comments about anything we talked about today, or anything else about podcasting?
I just want to thank you for this class. I missed the first one and I missed one month, but I've learned so much. I hope I'm not getting over my head at this, but I appreciate doing this online. It was just wonderful.
I'm so glad. I've been really glad that we've been able to offer it. And feel free to reach out at that email if you have any other follow-up questions too. I'd be happy um, to chat with people if you have questions in the future as well.